5 children went to bed on Christmas Eve, 1945. Their house burned to the foundation in 45 minutes. And when the ashes cooled, there was nothing inside them. No bones, no teeth. No trace of 5 human beings who had been alive less than an hour before. The fire took the house, but something else took the children. George Sodder was born Giorgio Soddu in Tula, Sardinia, in 1895. He came to America at 13, alone, and spent his teenage years laying railroad ties in the coalfields of West Virginia. By the time he was 40, he'd built a trucking company, married a woman named Jennie Chipri A.H.N., and fathered 10 children in a clapboard house on a hillside outside Smithers, West Virginia. George was loud, proud, the kind of immigrant who loved America so fiercely he refused to stay quiet about what was happening in the country he'd left behind. He spoke openly against Mussolini at a time when Italian communities in Appalachia kept their politics to themselves. That mouth of his made enemies, and in a small town in coal country, enemies don't forget. By December 1945, 5 of the 10 Sodder children were still young enough to live at home. Maurice, 14. Martha, 12. Louis, 9. Jennie, 8. Betty, 5. The older ones had scattered. John was in the army. Marion was 17. George Jr. was 16. The baby, Sylvia, was 2. Christmas was coming. The house smelled like pine and coal smoke. The children wanted to stay up late. Their parents let them. Months before the fire, the threats arrived. Not all at once. In pieces, like someone assembling a machine. October 1945, an insurance salesman came to the Sodder house. George turned him down. The man didn't leave. He stood in the doorway and said, and Jennie heard every word, "Your house is going to go up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed." He said George's anti-Mussolini talk had made the wrong people angry. Then a stranger appeared to inspect the fuse boxes. He warned the family their house would burn. This was strange for a specific reason. The house had been recently rewired and passed inspection. There was nothing wrong with the wiring. The stranger knew that. He said it anyway. And then there was the car. The older Sodder boys noticed it parked along the highway near the house, idling, its occupants watching the younger children walk home from school. Not once, multiple times. No one in the family recognized the vehicle or the people inside it. 3 warnings. 3 different sources, all pointing toward the same night. December 24, 1945. The 5 younger children asked to stay up late. It was Christmas Eve. George and Jennie said yes, then went to bed around 10 o'clock. Around 12:30 in the morning, the phone rang. Jennie picked up. A woman's voice, unfamiliar, asked for a name Jennie didn't recognize. Wrong number. But before Jennie could hang up, she heard it in the background. Laughter, clinking glasses. The sound of a party. As if the caller wasn't confused at all. As if the point of the call was simply to check whether someone in the house would answer. Jennie noticed the downstairs lights were still on. The children hadn't gone to bed yet. She hung up and went back to sleep. Roughly 30 minutes later, around 1 in the morning, something hit the roof. A loud bang, then a rolling sound, like an object tumbling down shingles before dropping off the edge into the yard. Nobody woke up. At 1:30, Jennie woke to the smell of smoke. It was coming from downstairs, from the area near George's office, near the fuse box. By the time she reached the hallway, the fire was already climbing the walls. George, Jennie, Marion, George Jr. and baby Sylvia got out. They stood in the frozen yard and screamed for the 5 children still inside. Then George went for the ladder. It was always there, a tall ladder leaning against the side of the house, long enough to reach the 2nd floor. It was gone, not fallen, not buried in snow. Gone. He ran to his coal trucks. He could back one up to the house, climb onto the cab, reach the windows. Both trucks were dead. Both had worked perfectly the day before. Neither would turn over. George tried to climb the exterior walls with his bare hands. He broke a window on the upper floor with his fist. The heat drove him back. The house was collapsing inward, the roof folding down into the rooms where his children slept. The water barrel beside the house was frozen solid. Jennie ran to call the fire department. The phone was dead. Not damaged by heat, the line had been cut. Someone had climbed 14 feet up the telephone pole, reached 2 feet out from the pole itself, and severed the wire. Before the fire, before any of it started, a neighbor made the call instead. The fire department took 7 hours to arrive. 7 hours. The chief later said he couldn't drive the truck himself and had to find someone who could. The house, a wooden frame structure on a West Virginia hillside, collapsed into its basement in 45 minutes. By the time the trucks arrived, there was nothing left but a rectangle of ash and ruin in the snow. The state police ruled the fire accidental, faulty wiring. The coroner agreed. 5 death certificates were issued before New Year's Day, less than a week after the fire. Case closed. There was one problem with this conclusion. There were no remains, no bones, no teeth, no skull fragments, nothing. 5 children, the youngest weighing perhaps 40 pounds, had supposedly burned to death in their beds, and the wreckage held no physical evidence they had ever been inside the house. Fire Chief Morris offered an explanation. The fire had been hot enough to cremate the bodies entirely. This is not how fire works. Cremation requires sustained temperatures between 1400 and 1800 degrees Fahrenheit, maintained for 2 to 3 hours in an enclosed chamber. A house fire burns hot but collapses quickly. It does not erase skeletons. Morris later made another claim. He said he'd found a human heart in the debris. He buried it quietly without telling the family or conducting an analysis. When George Sodder finally forced authorities to exhume it, a funeral director examined the object and identified it as a piece of beef liver. Not a heart, not human. Deliberately placed. The insurance salesman who had threatened George and his children, who had looked Jennie in the face and told her the house would burn, was sitting on the coroner's jury. In 1949, George hired a pathologist to excavate the site himself. The team found 4 lumbar vertebrae. George must have felt something close to hope collapse when the Smithsonian's analysis came back. The bones belonged to a single individual, aged 16 to 22. The oldest missing child was 14. The vertebrae showed no evidence of fire exposure whatsoever. They had likely been present in the fill dirt used to grade the lot, old bones from old ground, irrelevant to the Sodder children. The remains proved nothing. But the absence proved everything George already believed. His children had not burned. They had been taken. After the fire, witnesses began to surface, the kind of people who see things in small towns and keep quiet until someone gives them permission to speak. A school bus driver came forward. He said that on Christmas Eve he'd seen people on the road near the Sodder property throwing what he described as balls of fire at the house. When the snow melted that spring, little Sylvia, the 2-year-old who'd survived, found a small dark green rubber object in the yard where the roof had shed whatever struck it that night. George examined it. He recognized it immediately. A napalm pineapple bomb, a small incendiary device from the Second World War. The kind of thing that would bang on impact, roll down a shingled roof, and ignite whatever it landed near. A woman who ran a small roadside stop between Fayetteville and Charleston told the Sodders she'd served breakfast to 5 children, matching the descriptions of the missing kids on the morning after the fire. Christmas morning. They were alive. They were traveling. In 1952, a hotel worker in Charleston reported seeing 4 children, accompanied by 2 men and 2 women she described as being of Italian extraction, arrive at the hotel around midnight. When she approached the children, one of the men fixed her with a look she called hostile and began speaking rapidly in Italian, pulling the children away. And then there was the man who admitted to cutting the phone lines. His explanation, he'd been stealing a block and tackle from an outbuilding on the property that night and had cut the line to avoid detection. He offered this as though it clarified things. It did the opposite. Why was he there at that hour, on that night? Who sent him? He was never charged. The questions were never answered. George Sodder did not rebuild his house. He cleared the wreckage, planted grass, and erected a billboard. It went up in the early 1950s on Route 16, right at the site where the house had stood. The faces of all 5 children stared out at passing traffic. School photos, black and white, frozen at the ages they'd been the last time anyone in the family saw them. Below the photos, descriptions, heights, eye colors. A $10,000 reward. The billboard stood for nearly 4 decades. Every car that passed through that stretch of Fayette County drove under the gaze of 5 children who had never been proven dead. It was not a memorial. It was an accusation. In 1967, 22 years after the fire, an envelope arrived at the Sodder home. Postmarked Central City, Kentucky. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. A young man, roughly 30 years old, looking directly into the camera. He looked like Louis Sodder. Louis, who had been 9 on Christmas Eve, 1945. Louis, who would have been approximately 30 years old if he were still alive. On the back of the photograph, someone had written, "Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, Illil boys, A90132 or 35. The family studied the message for years. Frankie was not a name used by anyone in the Sodder family. Illil boys has never been decoded. The string of numbers, A90132 or 35, could be a case number, a military service number, an institutional ID. Nobody knows. The Sodders hired a private investigator and sent him to Central City, Kentucky. He took their money. He disappeared. He never reported back. The family withheld the Kentucky postmark from public reporting. If Louis was alive, they didn't want whoever had taken him to know that the family was getting close. They never got closer. George Sodder died in 1969 without answers. Jennie died in 1989. Shortly after her death, the billboard came down. Grass grew over the posts. Sylvia, the baby, the one who survived because she was small enough to be carried, spent her adult life continuing the search. She filed requests. She submitted DNA to the West Virginia State Police. She gave interviews into her 70s, still sharp, still certain. Sylvia died in 2021. She was 79 years old. The DNA is still on file. No confirmed match has ever come back. Here is what remains. A photograph of a man who might be Louis. A message no one can read. A string of numbers that could mean anything. A cut phone line. A missing ladder. A piece of beef liver buried in place of a child's heart. A fire chief who couldn't find a driver for 7 hours on Christmas morning. An insurance salesman who threatened a family and then sat in judgment on whether they died. And a patch of grass along Route 16 in Fayette County, West Virginia, where a billboard used to stand, where 5 faces used to watch the road, where every passing car carried someone who glanced up, read the sign, and drove on, carrying the question with them whether they wanted to or not. Somewhere there may be an old man with a photograph in a drawer. On the back, a name, a fragment of a sentence, a number that unlocks a door that no one alive still knows how to find.